It is recording, right? Okay. So today we will talk about revolutions in the West, and we'll take two examples, the American Revolution and the French Revolution. We talked a little about the French Revolution, but we want to connect them and talk about the period and that era that lots of things happened, and we're taking the two examples here because they really have a very a good effect on what happened later in history, and that affected also human rights. We'll see how. Now, the American Revolution began first, and then the French. They were, in a way, getting in the same era. For example, we'll see the difference in timing just a little bit. But let's talk first about a revolution. What is meant by revolution? So that we can consider what is meant by what is the American and the French Revolution. Now, the American Revolution, the one that we are talking about today, you should know that it happened between this era, which is from 1775 to 1781. That's the time or the period that took place, the American Revolution. And that took a lot of time, as you can see, because it's not easy. Many things happened at that time. So let's think now and define what is meant by revolution to understand the situation. Now, a revolution is, of course, it's not peaceful, it is violent, okay? So it is violent removal of leadership or government in a country. At that time, what was violent against leadership or government, well, you should know that the leadership or government at that time was not fair enough. This is why they revolted. Now, the last quarter of the 18th century also is called the Age of Revolution, of revolutions. So this is very famous century, the 18th century. And because of lots of revolutions took place at that time, or it is called 18th century is called as the Age of Revolutions. And of course, what revolutions do we are we talking about? It's the American and the French mostly. Now, why do you think it was called like this? Because this question will be discussed later. We'll talk about it. Just take please the notes. And why is it called like this? Okay, the Age of Revolution. That's very, very important to think about, and we'll talk about it later. Now, there was, of course, here we are talking, just taking an idea about the background. There were 13 states on the east coast of America. So at that time, we're talking about 13 states. That was in the second half of the 18th century. And these states were known in Britain as colonies. At that time, they were not known as states. They were called colonies. Okay, so they were taken or thought of as if they are colonies. Now, the ancestors of people who had immigrated there, they were immigrated from Britain, and they took the place of the east coast of America to settle. Okay, and they were part of what is called the British Empire at that time, and that British, you know, that the British Empire were ruled by a king, a very famous king who's called King George. Here, as you can see, here we have this Latin numbers. Okay, you can see the Latin numbers, and as I told you, that if you see this number and you have the one that's like the letter V, so that's King here, George III. Okay, and at that time he was the king or the emperor. It's like an emperor. Okay, not like a king, although it's called a king. Now, what were the causes of the American Revolution? Now we'll talk about the main cause that was enlightenment. Now, what is enlightenment? It's a very important term. If you want to talk about it, so it's the beginning of having light in the mind. So it's like during the mid 18th century, they were so educated, and people in Europe came up with new ideas and reforms. So, and that was what is called the age of enlightenment also, as opposed to the age of revolutions. Now, ideas such as the idea that one of people should rule, that people should rule, not the leader should govern without taking the acceptance of the people or approval of the people. That was not accepted. So people should rule their own country. That was at that time the new idea. Held by or thought by people that at that time, and that time was called Enlightenment, as you can see. Now, what happened after that? We can see that different, the idea of taxes, the question of taxes was a real problem. So the British sent armies to America to defend the colonists from that kind of attack of the American Indians. They were at that time, and also we have the French forces. They were seated also in Canada. So at that time, the forces helped to defeat the American Indians, and they drove the French out of Canada. So that was the beginning. And then Britain believed that colonists should help to pay this military support. So the British Parliament passed laws, and such laws were like what is called at that time the Stamp Act. And at that time, taxes were placed upon America also, upon all American documents, such as newspapers and also wills. So this is how the idea of taxation began in a way. You can see also that at that time, 1770, that was the era of Boston Massacre. Massacre also is a French word to see where you can see violent wars that ended in the death of people, usually innocent people. So it's a group of local people who were protesting against taxes in Boston, and because of protesting, they were sentenced to death in massacres. So they jeered and threw stones at British soldiers at that time, and the soldiers opened fire, and so they killed 5 people at the beginning. So it was not accepted at the beginning to see lots of fire and massacre that was taking place. So anger spread through the colonies, and they were forced. That forced the British army to cancel some of the taxes, the British government to cancel some of the taxes, and they had to put it into end. Okay, now what tax remained in place? What do you think? Now we'll see. Now the Boston, we have not all taxes were abolished. Some of them remained. Now the Boston, there was what is called the Boston Tea Party, which is known at that time because of the American colonists who wanted to avoid paying tax on tea. Okay, and they often smuggled tea into America, and many colonists made a lot of money through smuggling tea. And you can see this situation is there. You can see it in many countries, and that is because of the poor, spread of poor people everywhere. So they wanted to make a living. Now, in November 1773, English ships arrived at Boston port, and they carried tea, and that was taxed, but it was still cheap. It was cheap enough to make smuggling unprofitable. So that was without any sense. So on December 16th, a group of colonists arrived at the port, and they were disguised as Indians at that time. And they dumped the tea into the harbor. So that was called as Boston Tea Party. And again, it's one of the situations where they were trying to get away of the taxes. Now, the First Continental Congress is very, very important. That was known in 1774 with delegates from the 13th colonies, as we said. They met in Philadelphia. So the first delegation or first Congress was in Philadelphia. Philadelphia is very famous for this important meeting. And the Congress was called for an end to British taxation. And for that, they tried to return and work on the elected council. And they asked if colonies were accepted to raise any army to fight again against the British. So that was the major theme of the Congress at that time. Now, what action did the British government take at that time? Again, here you can see that the British closed the ports and the city of Boston, and they replaced locally elected councils with officials in London. So it's as if you are talking about here elections or kind of problems that were raised not only in America and Britain. In London officially. Now, this is what is called, as you can see, this painting. It represents the battles of what is called the Lexington and Concord. That was in 1775. And you can see also that the British Parliament at that time and the Crown, they could see that the American colonists were moving into a state of rebellion. So King George III believed that colonists were hiding a very large amount of weapons at that time in the town of Concord, which was near Boston. And he eventually sent his British troops to the town, and that was in April in 1775. And they wanted to destroy the ammunition that was located there. Now, the colonists were also told that the British about the British troops' arrival, and that was by a number of spies at that time. That was called Paul Revere, and or in French Revers, Paul Revers. That was a large group of colonists gathered in the town of Lexington, and as the British soldiers approached there, and a violent battle emerged between the two sides. They wanted to leave the casualties for both sides in the town of Lexington. That was the first thing that took place, and then the British troops reached Concord and destroyed the weapons and the ammunition that they could find, and the fighting continued until that was upon the North Bridge. There were many forces of the British troops. They wanted to retreat back to Boston. And by that time, they almost there were thousands of American colonists that emerged to engage in the conflict. And this marked the beginning also to the War of Independence. So here you can see the beginning of the War of Independence. Now, the American War of Independence, that was at that time from 1775 till 81. That was the era. This painting illustrates the war at that time. And you can see from the timeline here that the war began in April 1775. And that time, the American colonists clashed with the British troops. That was in Lexington, and Concord, that was near Boston. And we have here also, it was known that at Bunker Hill, that was near Boston, the British also defeated the Americans. But although of that, they suffered of heavy casualties. Now, the Second Continental Congress, that was so the first. Now, what about the second? The second was in May 1775, and they appointed there George Washington as the commander-in-chief. So he was the commander-in-chief of the American Army, George Washington. So that was in 1775. Now, what happened? Now, the Continental Congress, they meet for the third time at that time. That was on the 4th of July. And this is a very important date. That was the Third Continental Congress. And that was in 1776, okay? They wanted to create at that time, or they tried to create what is called nowadays the American, at that time, the American Declaration of Independence. And this is a very famous date, the 4th of July. It's the Independence Day for America. So the British claim victories in New York and in Philadelphia, but the Americans defeated them at the Battle of what is called Saratoga. Now, the Battle of Saratoga was in 1777, and the American Army also spent the winter till 78 in training at the Valley Forge, and they lived in very terrible conditions because they tried, lots of people, or many people died there. Some of them ran away also. Now, what happened after the American victory at Saratoga? France decided to enter the war and to join the colonist side. And French intervention was very major. That was a major reason for American victory. So, with the help of the French troops, the Americans surrounded the British army at what is called Yorktown in October 1781. Now, so take into consideration that the American people like the French people because of this, that they helped them to counter the British. Now, the British army were forced to surrender because of that. And that was the American here. The Americans had won their war of independence. You can see this is an image to illustrate that. And the American Declaration of Independence, that was in 4th of July 1776. They declared that the United States of America was free and independent of Britain, and it declared that the major principles of equality for all men of America, and they declared that an elected president would rule or should rule a free United States of America. So that was also the result of the Declaration of Independence. Now, this is a very famous painting, a profile for George Washington, who lived from 1732 till 1799. And you can see George Washington was... can you please wait? Can you please wait? Do you have questions? Can you take it down? Yes, please.
بس أنا عن محاضرة دكتورة وما طلع.
Okay, please let's continue, and we'll give you some time to continue on questions later, please. I don't want to interrupt. Okay. Now, what about George Washington, who was born? He was born in Virginia in 1732, And at that age of 20, he inherited his father's large estate. He joined the British Army in Virginia, and he served as an officer in wars. And that officer in war was against American Indians at that time and the French. Now, what about after leaving the army? In his mind, his mid-20s, he married a very rich widow named Martha Dandridge, and he became in a Virginian deputy of the First Continental Congress in 1774. That was Virginian deputy, and he was appointed as a commander-in-chief of the American Army. But that was by the Second Continental Congress, not the third. Now, the American won the War of Independence in October 1781, and Washington was appointed as the first president of the newly independent United States of America. He served as the president for 8 years, and he retired in Mount Vernon. He retired to Mount Vernon, Washington, D.C. He died later in 1799. Now, this is the flag of the United States of America, and here you can see that the American colonists decided they should form a single state, and the United States of America, that was called the United States of America. Single means united here, okay? And the individual states wanted independence too. So the Constitution was at that time the Constitution of the United States of America. It was drawn up in a Congress meeting also that was in Philadelphia. So Philadelphia was very famous for the Continental Congresses. Now here you can see the Constitution of the United States. This is an image to illustrate the people of America Constitution. And they initiated the beginning of what is called the Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights is very important because it's the beginning of human rights here. So the Constitution also here contains a Bill of Rights, and there were lots of amendments. They lay down basic rights that they think that they cannot be taken away from any citizen. Examples on some rights, the right to, for example, to free speech, the right to practice religion, and to have a fair trial and not to suffer because of cruelty and unusual punishment at that time. Of course, this did not apply originally to slaves and women. So that was the problem at that time, that they have that was not accepted to slaves or to women. So that was very, very bad according to human rights. Now we can think, but that was the beginning, of course. Now the central federal government that was defined as it was meant here to take care of defense and or foreign affairs. So the federal government or the central federal government was responsible for defense, foreign affairs, international treaties, and economy of America. Now each state could regulate its own local affairs, and that was very important, so that, for example, public health, education, welfare, and law and order, that was according to each law, to each state to be regulated. Now the US after that became one of the most what is called democratic countries in the world, and we can see it till nowadays. Now that is the importance of the American Revolution. Of course, before the European was known. Now the American Revolution was created as the most powerful country in the world, and here you can see the success of the revolution that was shown in it's very ordinary people who can take control of everything in their own country, and that was democracy. You can also see the American Revolution that influenced other countries, and for example, we have the French Revolution after that, and then in 1789, and then the Revolution of Ireland, 1798, and then South America during the late 1800. Okay, 1800, or that was the beginning. And then it's an introduction to lots of, you can see, revolutions. So in America, the power belonged to the people. So there were no royal family, no aristocrats at that time, as was in France. And during 19th century, the USA expanded toward what is called the Pacific Ocean at that time, and it bought territory from French and Spanish Mexicans, and also British and Russians. So it conquered the territory from the Mexicans, or what is called the native speakers, okay, and Americans at that time. Now, this is the photo to show the comparison between loyalists and patriots. For example, we have people at that time, some of them were accused as not loyal because of fighting with the army to protect their human rights or their rights. And there was a problem in considering them as loyal. Instead of that, they were taken as patriots. Now, during the time of American Revolution, many residents of the colonies were unsure whether the idea of separating from England is good or right or bad. So was it a wise decision or not? Now, the Loyalists were strictly opposed to the separation from Britain, while the Patriots were against that. So they had a strong belief in their shared culture of heritage, and they, especially the one that was related to the British. Now, they also felt that there is a strong sense of duty and loyalty toward the British crown, and loyalists benefited from that, from what is called the transatlantic trade with England, and they were very worried at that time that the independent nation would be reduced to what is called anarchy. And in anarchy or anarchism, you can see lots of people revolting and using violent means and ways to succeed. That was the problem of it. Now, patriots had valid reasons, of course, for wanting to part with England, and they believed their individual liberties had been violated at that time by the British Crown. So they felt their rights were being taken away from the British because of the taxes and the acts they've done. And examples of that was acts that included what is called the Quartering Act, which was held in Boston, and the Harbor, what is called the Harbor Bill of Acts, of Quartering Act, and the colonists lacked any kind of representation in the parliament. So the patriots believed that the English crown was attempting to gain more and more to control over their lives and businesses. So that was the story behind it. Now, what about the French Revolution? That is another situation that happened in the West, and revolution at that time, they benefited, of course, from the American Revolution. That was held see the timing here, it's from May 5th, 1789 till 1799. So you're talking about a period of time that is not short. So the French Revolution here began, as you can see, when the ancient Ancien Régime, which is in French, ancient in English, that was, abolished in favor of what is called a constitutional monarchy, and that was the replacement in September 1792 till what is called the First French Republic that was led by the execution of, as I told you last time, Louis. You can see that in January 1793, okay, Louis the 16th here, you are talking about a period of time that was extended to the period of political, what is called as political turmoil. Now, what were the causes of the French Revolution? To summarize, they are a little bit similar to that of the American. So it was poor economy, poverty, massive spending of by the royals, and hatred of what is called a very famous character at that time known as Marie Antoinette. Marie Antoinette, that was the people of were so against her, and you know, as I told you, the Enlightenment ideas that spread there because of the American Revolution. Now, so the American Revolution was one of the causes to affect the French Revolution in a way, and we can see that the needs of the French people to consider were political power, social equality. These were here you can see the principles that later were manifested in their revolution: the political power, social equality, food, to have food for you know, because many people were hungry, and to fight for respect and humanity. Also the ability to provide for their families, and the royalty to step down, also give them the situation here that they can step down. And now, what about the first state? It was clergy, which is a church, a privileged state at the time, and you can see at that time that less than 1% of the population, but it was owned by 10% of the land, so that was the problem. And not only were they minimally taxed, but they collected also 10% from the people, which is called as tax-like payment. Okay. Now, the second estate, again, here was very famous. It's a nobility holding, let's say, estate that worked on the highest positions in the church, and the army and the government were there together with them. Now, 2% of the population were controlled by the majority of the wealth, and with exempts from the paying of taxes of any kind, let's say, and they collected rent and customary dues from the peasantry. That was, again, the problem at that time. Now, the third estate, that consisted of everyone, not in the other two states. So it is bourgeoisie, let's say, the peasantry, and the urban artisans. Now, they made up a 98% of the population, while you can see that the bourgeoisie, which is a French word, as I told you, was made of merchants, manufacturers, bankers, doctors, lawyers, and intellects. So very, very important class, and all had wealth, but wealth did not mean at that time status of privilege. It was very, very accepted at that time. Now, what about the third state, which is the peasantry here? They consisted of approximately 21 million people, so it's not easy here. They lived in utmost poverty, and collectively they owned 30 to 40% of the available land, which was usually small plots, and most lands were rented from the peasants who were able to afford it, or to you know, to work with the nobility. Now, what about the paid taxes to the king, and taxes to the church also at that time, and taxes and dues to the lord of the manor, and you know, as well as the numerous dues of you know, wine, salt, and bread. Everything was taxed in a way, very major things. Now, the third state also, which was in 1789, here we are talking about taxes and the rent that increased, and methods of farming were inadequate, and there was a poor harvest, and prices of bread and other goods they rose at a quicker rate than wages. And wages increased by 22%, while the cost of living increased by 62%. And that was a big difference, you can see. Now, what about the economic conditions in France? You can see poor people who were starving, and you can see that when the price of bread increased, angry mobs also were formed at that time. And to meet the meetings that were at that time by the States General, the French Congress consisted of 3 states. First meeting was that was in nearly 20 years, 200 years, and King Louis, the Sixth assembled the states to pass a tax increase, while the third state objected and developed their own plan. So what was that? They would ask here for the third state objection. Now, tennis court oath, here we can see it was locked out of the state meeting. The third state meets at local tennis court. So that was very famous. They vote to create a new French constitution at that time. So, then what about the National Assembly? You can see that on June 17th, 1789, the third state was, renames itself as the National Assembly, and they have the votes to change France and at the end or ending absolute monarchy that they refused to establish anymore as a representative government. They think that they deserve much better. Now, what about King Louis? King Louis also, he held a general meeting. King Louis XVI, a general meeting where the government attempted to intimidate the third state into what is called a submission era. Now, there's a very famous also storm, or what is called the storming of Bastille, that was inspired by the National Assembly and the commoners they began with a riot. They wanted to protest of the rising prices. So lots of revolutionary acts happened, and they first raided the Paris town hall in a pursuit of arms. And then they realized that the Bastille contained a large armory. And at that time, many angry citizens were in support of the National Assembly that stormed in the prison. They stormed the prison in Paris at that time. That was the image to represent the storming of Bastille. And very famous, furor sweeps France. Most of the uprising began and occurred because of the struggling countryside in France, and many peasants and farmers suffered under very high prices and unfair feudal contracts. They began to wreak havoc on rural France. That was very important to declare. It was the beginning of what led later on to what is called the Declaration of the Rights of Man. Now, on August 26th in 1789, that was the National Assembly. They gathered and they issued what is called the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of a Citizen. That document also guaranteed a process that is very important in judicial matters, and they established what is called the sovereignty of people and the land. Now, every person was a French man, and so they thought they should be all equal. And of course, they did that. They succeeded, and French people embraced the document, while the king and nobles did not. Of course, because that was against their sovereignty. Now, what about the National Assembly reforms in France? Now, the National Assembly, joined by the nobles, they acted out of fear, and that made them sweep and make work on reforms, and they eliminated the privileges of the church and the nobles. That was the beginning of eliminating the privileges of the church, of course. Now, the Legislative Assembly, which is the National Assembly, it became the Legislative Assembly, and that limited the king's power, with the radicals and the moderates and the conservatives. They all disagreed on the governmental ideas. So, what about war after that? There was war with Austria, and King Louis also had contact with the rulers of Austria and Prussia and Sweden, and also they were of course asking, they were asking, this is one E, okay? They were asking for their help in restoring the family to power. And in June 1791, the royal family attempted to escape to the Austrian border. So they wanted to escape, but they were caught by revolutionaries, and they were brought back to Paris. Now, what happened later? Prussia and Austria, they demanded the king that should be unarmed and restored to power, and military force that they would use to restore the monarchy. So on April 20th, April in 1972, we have here the Legislative Assembly that declared war against Austria. That was very famous at that time, till what we have as, or what is known as the execution of the king. That was in 1972. In autumn, a national convention was elected to oversee the country. And, the new constitution was created by Legislative Assembly. And we have the first action that was to abolish the monarchy. And from that time, we can see that we have the Republic of France that was created. So it was in 1972. And then next to that action was the execution of the king. That was in 1793. Sorry, this one is wrongly written. It's 1792. Okay, and then King Louis was found guilty of treason and was executed at what is called a guillotine. Now, this word is a French word. Let me show you here. This is the execution of the king, how it was. And this is the word guillotine, a French word, meant the execution. And you can see that a new device was created at that time in 1792 that was meant to make executions efficient. And for very many human and democratic assemblies that were gathering at that time in October 1793. Also, Marie Antoinette was there, and they also executed them. And we have the symbolic, of the symbol of declaration of sovereignty that was known at that time because of the guillotine that was used at that time. Here you can see the Maximilien Robespierre, very famous in the army also, and he was a committee of the public safety that was created at that time to maintain order with France. And Robespierre rose to power, what was known at that time as he was a leader of Jacobins, and they were banished to a place called Girondins. And he at that time he promised to have a republic virtue, or republic of virtue, or virtue of republic. In French, you write it in this way: République de vertu. Okay. Now they ruled all with terror, and you know, that was his rule at that time, and that was known as the Reign of Terror. The dictatorship era was from 1793 till 94. That was a critical year where they executed also. He was executed in that time. Now, what about the moderate regain of power? They moderated, the moderates at that time, they come to power and established the government, and they had two house legislative bodies and executive body of 5. They were known as what is called the Directory, and the Directory would have no legislative power, but you know, that would have the authority to appoint people to fill positions with the government. Okay. Now, here you can see one very famous personality, which is a character of Napoleon Bonaparte. That was the rise of Napoleon, who protected the National Convention and led French army to victory against the Austrian troops. So that was in the beginning of 1799, when they were put in charge of the military directory and was dissolved in that time. Now, a vote of the people in 1800 gave all real power to Napoleon, as he was the first consul. Now, what happened after that? We can see that he was considered as a leader, recognized. He reorganized the economy. He fired corruption and corrupt government officials. He established public schools, and he set up also what is called the Napoleonic Codes. And on December 1802, he was crowned. He crowned himself as an emperor, and began a military campaign that you all know that took place to control Europe. Now, this is a very famous also painting to reflect Napoleon crowns himself. Okay, and sorry, you can see that Napoleon's mistakes some of them were the British blockade and the invasion of Spain and Portugal, and the invasion of Russia, and of course that invasion of Europe, as the main powers declared the war of on France, and surrendered his crown in April 1814. Now, the fall of Napoleon, that was after a brief exile later, and he returned to lead France. So he led French into a battle against the British again, and British defeated Napoleon at Waterloo in 1815, where you can see lots of at that time they were in exile. He is exiled to St. Helena until his death in 1821. And this is another reason why you can see that the American people like French, but French don't like British till nowadays. They were affected by this history, of course, because they were exiled because of the British army. Now, the Congress of Vienna, that was very important here also, that you should know that in winter 1814 till 1815, that where they had the European leaders who gathered to develop a plan to restore stability in France. And this is the beginning of what is called nowadays the European community, okay, and commission. Now, the Austrian Prime Minister Clemens von Metternich also he helped to develop a plan to allow, a balance of power in Europe and to re-establish monarchies, across Europe at that time. That all illustrated what is called later on the Declaration of Rights of man and of the citizen, where you can see the representatives of French people who organized the National Assembly. They believed in that the ignorance, because of ignorance and neglect and contempt of rights of man, all that caused, that was the sole cause of public calamities and the corruption of the government, and they have determined to set forth, what is called a solemn declaration of the natural and unalienable rights, sacred rights. This is very important, that you cannot take it away of men. Therefore, the National Assembly recognized what is called the proclaims and the peasants of the rights under the auspices of the supreme being of all human rights of man and the citizens. Okay, now this is here you can see some of the articles, for example, of the Declaration of Rights and of Man. For example, men are born and remain free and equal in rights. Social distinction may be founded only upon general good. Okay, and the aim of all political associations is the preservation of the natural, rights of men and rights such as liberty, property, security, resistance to oppression. Okay, they have the right to resist. And the principles of all sovereignty reside here according to the nation. And some of the articles talked about liberty, how it consists of freedom to everything. That was very important concerning the natural rights, concerning the limits of their rights, and such discussion that took place. Also, you can see many articles on law talking about law that can only prohibit such actions. Of course, especially if it's hurtful to society, and law of, as the expression of general will, and that every citizen has the right to participate personally and through, his or her representatives, and of course, no person shall be accused or arrested or imprisoned without, of course, by law, without a reason, and the law should provide for such punishment only because of when taking, the necessary action, and that they shall not suffer of punishment except if it's legally inflicted. Now, many articles you can see also, some of them about how people are held innocent until they shall be declared guilty, and this is very famous till nowadays. We can see that here in Jordan also we can see the French acts are considered in our constitution, in our law, and no one shall be disquieted on account of his opinions. So the right to choose also the religious views, to manifest and declare the public establishment of public order is very important and established by law. Free communication also, communication of ideas, of opinions, freedom of speech, of writing, of printing, and so on. It's very defined in by law, and also they were all responsible for the abuses of course, of freedom. Now, the security of rights is very important. Rights of men, of citizens, and of course, the idea of public military forces to defend the nation. And here you can see also many articles talking about the common contribution of public forces for the administration, not that should defend the administration, and that citizens have a right to decide either personally or by representatives, of course, and that was by the granting them a public contribution. And that also they have the right to fix the proportion, or to through the assembly and the collection of the taxes also is known at that to be manifested that way. Now society has the right also to require every public agent as an account of his accountable for his administration, and society that is meant to work on separation of powers, and that property is inviolable. You cannot violate their rights. They are such rights are sacred and legally accepted and determined, and they should be manifested through such acts. Here you can see the lots of books and that are manifested in the websites. You can see here we have a material written where you can see on history and American Revolution, also the French Revolution. In Britannica Wikipedia, of course, you can take an idea if you wanted to take more revision of that. Let me now stop and listen to your questions if you have any comments.